So I know you guys hear a lot from me all the time up here, but yeah, I just hadn't done this part of the program, so I thought it's about time to do that. But when James asked me to give my testimony, to share my story, I mean, I have to be honest. I was like, what? Do I have a testimony? I was almost embarrassed to say that I didn't have one. I mean, why? Because I thought testimonies were about how one never knew God, or they found him and then turned away from him, and then found their way back. And I can't say either of those scenarios ever happened in my life. As young as I can remember, I knew Jesus, and I never turned my back on him. I've had turmoil, trials, frustration, disappointments, but even within those lows, I haven't turned my back on him. Of course, because I'm human, I have and I continue to have questioning conversations with God, wondering sometimes, where is he in all this mess? At times, I've actually been oddly jealous of those who have had amazing conversions, wishing I could feel the excitement and joy of realizing how amazing God is and experience the changes in my life. Of course, my logical brain tells me that I really wouldn't have wanted to go through those experiences that a lot of people have gone through in their life. I should be grateful for knowing him since I was young. So I realized that my testimony is not about how God necessarily worked in my life, but how my picture of God and how I relate to God has changed throughout my life. And it got me thinking, okay, so where am I going to start this? And, we know God wants us, all his children, to be with him in heaven. So it only stands to reason that God started working in my life before I was alive, before I was even here, before I was born. I mean, I look back on how lucky enough I was to grow up in a family that were in a Christian home, in addition to being taught the importance of the seventh day as being the Holy Sabbath. And being able to see how slowly and methodically the understanding of God and his love spread through both sides of my family astounds me. And it really shows me how patient God is as he gathers his children. So I'm going to give you a little family history. Both sides of my family are from Ohio. Cleveland, Ohio is where I was born. God actually first got the attention of my Nana, my dad's mother. This is a picture of my dad's parents, Virginia and Fred. And just so you know, I think she had that hairstyle most of her life. But sometimes smaller, sometimes bigger, I don't know. But, I'm really unsure of what really made her want to study the Bible. I mean, she didn't grow up a Christian. She actually grew up in an orphanage. So I don't know really that much about her life. But she did have Bible studies and soon was baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. My father, who's named Fred Jr., was outgoing, and, well, I would say he would be considered, at that point, a bad boy and a greaser back then. It wasn't long until he was kicked out of public school for his bad behavior. And it was then that my Nana decided that she was going to go ahead and put my my father and his brother, my Uncle Doug, in the SDA Seventh-day Adventist boarding academy there in Ohio called Mount Vernon Academy. And while they were there, they actually both became believers in Jesus and in the seventh day as being the holy day of rest. But it wouldn't be for several years before either of them were truly accepted Jesus as their Savior. This is my parents when they were younger, Fred and Sandra. My mother actually, she grew up in the Lutheran church. And but when my parents started dating, even though he was not going to church, he took my mom to church and introduced her to the seventh day and told her he wanted his kids to grow up in the church. According to my mom, who, by the way, I get my logical mind from, which is a curse sometimes. I don't know. Saturday made a lot of sense to her. I mean, as Lutherans, and most Christians church, they believe in the 10 Commandments. So following all of them completely made sense to her. And so she decided that that's what she wanted to do. And she soon, she joined the church. So it wasn't soon after that my parents were married, and and they had my sister and myself. And I'll just let you know, I put this picture on here of my sister making that face. Most likely she was looking up at something, but I'm really sure that's the face she makes when she's thinking about the crazy things I would do and how I would bother her. So I thought, that's appropriate. So that's my sister Fawn. Her middle name, her name's Michelle Fawn. And that's me, Ginger. Luckily, I had hair in that picture because it took a long time before that came in. I was a pretty bald baby. But in any case, after we were both born, my mom actually started going to church just with my sister and I. I mean, my father still at that time was not attending church. He may have once in a while, but it wasn't a regular occurrence. This is a picture of basically my dad's family, his parents. This is his brother and my Aunt Linda. And it was through the witnessing of my mother and my uncle at the time that my Aunt Linda became the third member in the family to be baptized. And but God wasn't finished yet. I mean, the Holy Spirit would continue to work on bringing as many of my family members to Him. That is my sister. So this is pre-me. Not pre-me, but pre-me. And that was at my grandparents' house. But they were a good-looking bunch, I think, back then. Big hair, but a good bunch. We'll forgive them for that. Since my father actually passed away in 2012, and when I was talking to my mom about all these stories, I continually forget so I never asked him, and I continually forget to ask my uncle, why would those two be so adamant about my mom and his, them going to church and becoming Adventists, yet they never fully committed to God? It's kind of an odd thing. But as I think the story goes, and this is coming from my mom, putting tidbits together of what I've heard over the years, during this time in their life, my father and my uncle's means of income was slightly illegal. They actually were facilitating backroom card games there in Cleveland, Ohio. And if you know anything about Cleveland, a lot of Italian mafia, and don't quote me on this, but my mom and I are pretty sure that the only way they could continue that, operating those card games, is to be paying the mafia off, because that was their territory. So, so maybe the reason behind them deciding, we're not going to fully commit to God, is because maybe they didn't want to be hypocritical. Maybe professing to be believers and still be involved in illegal activity was something they didn't want to do. But it wasn't long, actually, until the Holy Spirit started working on my uncle and impressing upon him that the need to stop the illegal card games. And he was able to convince he was able to convince my father that it was the best for both of them and for our families. And soon they were baptized and became colporteurs. Are you all familiar with what a colporteur is? That is someone that actually went door to door selling the Bible storybooks. And that's what they did for many years. My uncle and my father, very dynamic people, outgoing, and because of those personalities, they both excelled and became leaders, teaching others how to be successful at selling the books. And it was because of this job, my sister and I were able to attend Christian schools, that Seventh-day Adventist schools, from 1st to 12th grade. You know, during my school years, I would have to characterize my relationship with God as respectful, but mixed with fear. Don't get me wrong, I knew that God loved his children, but I also felt that there were things that you just don't do, or else you would miss out on going to heaven, or prayers wouldn't be answered. I've asked myself, where did this fear come from? No one literally told me that. I think it was just, no one told me, hey, if you do this, you're going to burn an eternal fire. I don't know. This belief, most likely it came into my mind because of how the stories in the Bible and the teachings of the church were presented to me at a young age. One verse that put some of that fear in my mind was actually, that's my grandma. That's my dad. That's Grandpa Cliff and Grandma Grace. Sorry, that's a bad picture, but I could not find one. That's my mom's parents. Matthew 7:13 through 14, and it says, "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter it by it are many, for the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." I heard that one over and over again. Was I going to be one of the few? Could I do the right things to be one of the few? Those are the couple of questions that I would ask myself. Does anyone remember, or have you ever seen a picture of this narrow path going to heaven? People walking on it and falling to the side? Well, I was taught you needed to keep your eyes on Jesus or you would fall. I took that literally as a child. I was like, oh my goodness, I have this narrow path that I have to walk. I'm afraid of heights. What if I look down? I'm just kind of looking. It's not like I don't believe, but I'm just going to fall. I don't know. Didn't seem fair. Once I was old enough to understand that wasn't a literal narrow path like the photo I could see, there was a bit of relief, yet I still remained concerned about the do's and the don'ts, the may or may not allow me to get to heaven. It wasn't a consuming thought, just one of those that kind of lingers in the back of your mind. Psalms 34 is a wonderful chapter. I'm sure you've read it, and if you haven't, please read through it. But there's a few of the verses within this chapter that literally shout, "Don't worry, my child. I have you in my hands. You cannot lose." I mean, verse 4, I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Verse 17, the righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. Verse 18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. In verse 22, the Lord redeems his servants. No one will be condemned who takes refuge in him. I was a dutiful child, one who is good at following rules. Rule breaking was nowhere in my DNA. Well, I say that, not that I didn't disobey once in a while, okay, but it wasn't a typical thing for me to do. If my parents told me to do something, especially my father, I did it. If the Bible told me to do something, I knew I should do it. Why? Because there were consequences for disobedience. I couldn't even reap the benefits of cheating on a test when I was in first grade. This is how, I stick to the rules. I mean, I remember one time I guess I didn't study or something. I went in, it was first grade. I'm sitting there and I actually cheated off a piece of paper that I was hiding under my desk. It wasn't more than 2 minutes after the test was over that I had to go confess to my teacher that, okay, I cheated. And even today, I'm the same way. I'd rather deal with the consequences of owning up to something I did wrong, said wrong, rather than wait for that hammer to fall on its own. I just don't want to deal with it. When I was in 7th grade, my parents moved to Michigan, from Michigan to Keene, Texas. Some of you may be familiar with Keene, and at the time, the majority of residents were Seventh-day Adventists. Being surrounded by like-minded friends for me made it easy to follow the rules and enjoy Friday nights and Saturdays. I can say I had a wonderful high school years. I know a lot of people don't like their high school years, but I completely enjoyed it. I had a wonderful time, had wonderful friends. I really didn't even have too many questions about God and religion during that time because of what I was surrounded by. Something that a few of you may know is that I have a real love for animals. And as a young girl, I would spend a lot of time playing with my pets. I mean, poor things, they had to endure being dressed up and pushed around in my baby buggy. And my sister was away from school, and those were my playmates. So I had a wonderful time. My love for animals has never faded. As a little girl, I dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. And so I set out to pursue that dream of mine. When I was 16, my first job was at a mixed practice veterinary clinic. For those of you that know or don't know, a mixed practice veterinary clinic is one that works with small and large animals, from like small as a rat up to as large as a horse. I wasn't very familiar with the larger animals, the cows and the horses. So it was a very educational job. It was very gross at times, but yet a lot of fun. And it really it solidified my desire to become a veterinarian. And I set my sights on attending Texas A&M University. And at the designated time, I did apply, and I was accepted. Getting into A&M wasn't actually as easy for me as you might think. I know many of you that have gone to university, it can be very difficult to get in, and some years it gets harder and harder. I was, in high school, an A and B student, but not such a great standardized test taker. So my SAT and ACT scores were basically average. They weren't bad, but they didn't shout out how wonderful and smart I was anyway. So to be accepted, I actually had to fill out a form showing them all the extracurricular activities and leadership positions I held during high school. And after I had done that, I actually was accepted. And I mean, I truly believe that God had his hand in that, because so many people were just automatically accepted into the university. And it really was a long form that they wanted me to prove that I could actually handle going to school there. But because of, God, he knew my dream and my love of animals. Because of him, my dream was within my grasp at that time. So I, packed up my things, left that nest, and headed for college. At Texas A&M, I lived off campus from the get-go. I didn't even ever live on campus. There wasn't any availability. So there I was on my own for the first time with no one's rules to follow. Attending a secular university tested my faith, and it proved to be just a bit harder to adhere to my beliefs than high school was. I could have gone wild, yet even then I dutifully went to church and made sure not to study on Friday nights or Saturdays, as doing so would infringe upon the belief of keeping the Sabbath day holy. For the most part, having that day of rest was wonderful. It gave me freedom from school anxieties and cares, although, I must admit, it did give me a little stress, knowing I had so many hours of studying to do, feeling like I couldn't or I shouldn't be studying during Sabbath. But because I didn't want to dishonor God and I didn't want to lose out on his blessings, I remained faithful to not doing anything I would do on any other day of the week. When I think back on how I was relating to God during my college years, I would have to admit that I was, and I'm using the words of Ty Gibson, treating God as a vending machine. I give this, or I do and don't do that, and he'll bless me with answered prayers. And a good example of this was me not studying and working on Sabbath. I honored his day of rest, and he was going to bless me with good grades on my tests, or so I thought. I was trying to earn God's favor. I was obeying God's commandments for the wrong reason. I don't know, can any of you guys relate to that at all? My first year in college, I literally saw all the letters on my report card. And the reason I say it was because multiple reasons, I'd have to say. I didn't have a very good advisor. I took way too many hard classes at one time. It was like 15 or 16 hours of science classes. And I thought I could study like I did in high school. That combination gets the grades, the results that I got. And I always joke, though, I should have just gone wild. I should have just gone wild. I would have at least had some interesting stories to tell, except oh, yeah, I just stayed home and made bad grades, That's what I did. That's how exciting my college years were. But, in any case, because I made those below B grades, when I did apply to vet school for the first time, I was denied. And it was because of my freshman grades. The low grades and being denied to vet school was quite a blow to my ego. Not to mention putting a huge question in my mind of why I was even bothering to not study on Sabbath. He knew how much I wanted this. He could have made it happen for me. Sorry, I get emotional. He could have done it, couldn't he? Didn't I put the right amount of coins into the God vending machine? Being a very tenacious person, I continued to pursue that dream. By retaking classes, obtaining more experience, working in the veterinary field, I applied to multiple vet schools 3 more times. each time denied. After the fourth attempt, knowing I had done everything that they suggested I do, I just couldn't do it anymore, and I walked away from that dream. I didn't have the energy nor the money. I didn't want to spend the money, I should say, because I probably could have found the money. Now, I had more practical experience than a lot of the students who were applying to vet school, and I still did not get accepted. It was a hard decision to make, but I did it. At this point, I really questioned God and his purpose in my life. Why in the world would you allow me to have this dream? Get me into Texas A&M just to have me fail? Why did God allow me to hit my head up against that wall for so long if I was not supposed to be a veterinarian? As you can see, I still struggle with that situation. I still have these questions. And I can't wait to ask God to show me, why was I there? There was a purpose. I just don't know what it is or what it was. If I would have made different choices, would my outcome have been different? Was I supposed to keep trying? Or was I there for a completely different reason? It was during that time at A&M that my parents got divorced. It almost happened a few years prior, so it really didn't come to too much of a surprise to me. In fact, because of how my father had been conducting himself during the previous 7 or so years, I was actually happy my mother finally was able to walk away from that toxic relationship. My dad, when he would feel like he was losing control of situation or life in general, he would get angry, and he could be very manipulative. Sadly to say, I did inherit the quick to anger gene. I have gotten a little better. I'm pretty sure my dad was going through a midlife crisis that ended up just kind of morphing into a lifestyle for several years. Because of this, slowly my relationship with him became more and more strained. He wanted control, and I wanted freedom to make my own decisions, especially now that I was adult. I was in college. Over time, our relationship deteriorated so badly that there were times I didn't speak to him very often or at all. Don't get me wrong. My dad was a good father. He always enjoyed fun activities with the family. He was very supportive of my sister and I. There really wasn't anything he wouldn't do for us just to see us achieve something we wanted, or something we wanted to have, or something we wanted to do. My relationship with my mom actually has always remained strong. She's a very logical person, something I inherited from her. And her emotions are pretty even-keeled, which I definitely did not inherit from her. As I said, I took that from a dad. She has always been the one I could go to for professional and personal advice. I've always looked up to my mother. I mean, she's 5'2", but I still looked up to her. She just had this knowledge of the Bible and the teachings of the church, and I knew I could go to her asking questions. Interestingly enough, it's my mom that I never wanted to disappoint. And not because of anything she ever did or said to me. She always has shown me love unconditionally. Also at A&M, I met a man I would actually spend 13 of my years married to. He was confident, smart, funny, kind, believed in God, and was interested in my religious beliefs. But there were several red flags regarding how we interacted and the fact that he didn't completely commit to my same beliefs, mainly keeping the Sabbath. He didn't fight me on it. He just didn't necessarily come with me. Yet I justified that relationship. Not only did I see him as better than some of the Christian guys I knew, but I had been physically intimate with him. And since I knew the Bible said that physical intimacy is something God created for married couples, I felt God already considered us married, and therefore he expected me to stay with him. Lest it would be considered like getting a divorce. And which I knew that was a no-no. I guess you could say, although I loved many things about him, I ultimately married him because I felt shame and fear before God. I don't remember actually including God in my decision about who to date or who to marry until months before I was set to get married. Sadly, when God did give me the answer I was praying for, I wasn't attuned to it. I also continued to carry the guilt of being physically intimate with someone I was not married to. So, sadly, I truly didn't believe what the Bible tells us in John 1:9. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to be cleansed from all unrighteousness. If I had believed that, maybe I would been able to walk away. Luckily, as we know, God works with even our bad decisions. As I mentioned earlier, I applied to veterinary school multiple times. I spent my first year at my marriage still working as a veterinary technician and taking night classes in the University of Texas. This would be my final time to apply to vet school. When denied acceptance, I was completely, as I said before, at a loss of what to do with my life. What else was I interested in? I literally didn't know. I mean, when you have a dream from age 7, that was my focus. Well, I like flowers. I do. I do. I like flowers. But that popped in my head. So I decided to learn how to arrange them. I thought that looks fun. And oddly enough, I ended up back at Texas A&M at a floral design school I never even knew existed. It was even in a building that I had classes in previously. I just thought that the botanist people were making things. I thought that's what that was. I was like, isn't that cool? You know, art and flowers, okay. Ultimately, I was never employed as a florist because, why? Because God had other plans for me. So during the time I was looking for a job, I was getting ready for an interview. I gathered all my papers together. I had this piece of paper that had the important numbers on. It was important I needed to call them. Put it in, I put everything in my car in the seat, and I thought, well, before I leave, I'm going to make sure I have that piece of paper. Because, before, back in the day, we didn't have the phones. So paper was the thing. I couldn't find it. I was just rummaging through it. I was like, where is that? I was like, oh my goodness. So back out of the car I went. I was like, I've got to find this. I must have dropped it at somewhere. So I'm, going through everything. Can't find it. Looking back on the paper that I thought I saw it in or got it from. Well, I didn't find it. But what I did find was information about a veterinary hospital manager position. It's like, well, there it is. I said, so I'll take that. I'll write it down. I'll call that other number. I'll figure it out. And I'm going to call this one. So I got back in the car, opened the door, looked down, and directly on top was that piece of paper that I was looking for. I mean, nothing was covering that. I believe to this day that God had an angel with his hand over, with their hand over it, not allowing me to see it because he needed me to go back in the house. So, so later that day, I did call that hospital. I got the interview. And even through the doctor's concerns of me not being willing to work on Saturdays unless it was a complete emergency, which typically I would only be in the kennels, he gave me the job. I mean, he verbally told me that that was a concern, but he still gave me the job. And that event in my life really shows how God works in our lives, even when we don't specifically ask. Because I hadn't asked for that. I was just looking for a job. I don't even remember if I was looking for working at a floral place, but I don't think so. But it was through the floral design and managing veterinary hospital, God revealed to me hidden talents I didn't know I possessed. In addition, he placed me in an environment I loved, where I could continue to use my veterinary technician skills, but also where I could gain managerial and business skills. Unknown at the time, these skills would be my work foundation and would open doors into many different careers. And some of you may have talked to me, and I just say I'm a very well-rounded person because I've done a lot of different things, but they've always built on each other. So now back to my husband. 4 years into our marriage, my husband and I decided to begin a family. And you would never guess, but it was at this very same time my father asked me if I would like to adopt my half-sister, Chelsea, whom I had never met. She was his daughter from an affair with a married woman, and this was after my parents had gotten divorced. As I also mentioned, I wasn't on the best terms with my father at the time, so this was quite a shock for him to be asking me such a life-changing favor. I won't get into the sort of details of the story, but I wasn't immediately sure what to do. Was this what God wanted for me? Or did he want it for my half-sister? This was huge, so I prayed to God for his guidance and made sure to be very specific this time. I was not going to make the same mistake twice and not recognize God's answer. I felt the best way, I can't even talk. I felt the best way to know for sure if I was going to move forward with the adoption was to have 3 people that this would affect the most and have the biggest reason to say no, say yes. Those were my husband, my sister, and my mom. I, of course, asked my husband first. He said yes. Talked to my sister. She said yes. Now it was time for my sister and I to talk to my mom, who I considered the real linchpin of the situation. Not only did my sister and I have to reveal to her that my father had had another daughter, but ask her to be the child's grandmother. My mom's a great person, but that was a huge ask. That was a huge ask. And if she said yes, I knew for sure that's what I was supposed to do. And since many of you know my daughter Chelsea, you know my mother said yes. She didn't even think twice. I mean, we sat down, we're like, hey, Mom, just want to let you know. And she's like, sure. I'm like, okay, so I agonized that for no reason. but that was my answer. She was 4.5 when I adopted her. Yes, the Bluebells of Texas. It was in 2021. Chelsea, my sister, was 4.5 years old, became my daughter. And without going into much detail, Chelsea's adoption was supposed to be slow and methodical, but it turned into a sudden event, meeting my father at McDonald's an hour away from home in the middle of the night one Friday, and having Chelsea handed over to me and my husband. At that point, I had only met her once. Luckily, my mother-in-law was able to watch Chelsea while we were at work, and I ended up quitting my job at the vet hospital a few months later and opened my own boutique. Don't ask. I know I wanted to stay home, but then that wasn't an option. So that's a whole nother story in itself. But being that it was so sudden too, I mean, just having a new child's hard, right? But it wasn't easy. Like all of us, Chelsea, no fault of her own, came with baggage, emotional baggage, and some baggage we weren't aware of until a few years later. And because my marriage wasn't strong, it made parenting that much harder. I struggle with the feeling I was a single parent, my anger towards my husband, and at times with Chelsea. But even through all the struggles, having Chelsea in my life has been truly a blessing and has taught me many things about myself. Many I'm not proud of that I learned, but has helped me to grow as a person. Eventually, after much counseling and praying, in 2008, I chose to divorce my husband. Even though I wasn't the perfect mom, I didn't want Chelsea growing up thinking that the way my husband and I related was normal and healthy. A question I have and still have: why would God allow me to adopt Chelsea if he already knew my marriage was a bit dysfunctional? Divorce was in the future. And I mean, I may have not been the most touchy-feely person that Chelsea needed at times. I'm just not. I mean, Chelsea kind of jokes. This isn't even my notes, but he kind of jokes that when it's Rob and I, that I'm the man and he's the woman. Because he's more tender, he's more nurturing, and I'm not. And I needed that. I needed to be that way for Chelsea. In addition to the divorce, I actually was forced to close my business due to the downturn in the economy, because that was 2008. But why didn't God help me find a way to continue? I was faithful to him. My boutique was closed during Sabbath hours. What more did he want? So there I was, single mom without a job. Luckily, my sister lived in the next town, and I was able to move in with her until I could figure out my next steps. And as with most divorces, Chelsea's time was split between her dad and me. And since she wasn't with me every week, I had downtime. I mean, hanging out with my married girlfriends just really wasn't an option. So I ended up on a Christian dating site, mainly just to chat with people. And literally, it really was for that. I really couldn't picture ever dating again. But of course, when I least expected it, I found myself falling madly in love with one of the men I had been talking to. He had 2 precious boys and amazing parents that I also fell in love with. I felt we had a great relationship and discussed getting married. His mother actually introduced me as her daughter-in-law. We weren't even married yet. Yet after 6 months, now again, that wasn't a long time, right? He suddenly broke up with me. And to this day, I don't know the reason. He literally never gave me one. Because the breakup came as such a shock, I immediately became very depressed. I was diagnosed with situational depression, which lasted about 2.5 to 3 years. I was broken. Once again, I found myself asking God, having the conversation I always have, why he would allow this to happen. He knew I was in love. This time I chose a man who believed the same as I did. Chelsea adored him and the boys. I could see us as a family. Not only would I would have had a daughter, but I would have had 2 sons. What had I done wrong? What now? I was pretty sure at this time I would never love anyone as wonderful as he. During that time of depression, I wasn't able to listen to the radio or TV. Yet I would turn the TV on without any sound, just so I could kind of see something happening, so I wouldn't feel so alone. What I could manage is reading. And it was during this time of depression that I actually felt the closest to God. I wasn't necessarily happy with him, but I still believed in his promises and loved and sought after answers by diving into his word and other Christian books. I, of course, prayed that I would get back together with this gentleman. But I prayed that if I were to love again, the man he brought me would have to be even better than the last. I mean, that was a huge thing. I mean, this guy was amazing, right? So you better be good. So 2012, I once again found myself in the Christian dating site. I don't know. I get bored and have to, I don't know. It's kind of embarrassing. And there I stumbled upon a handsome man, 6 years younger than myself. It wasn't Rob. What? Oh, no, it was. His name was Rob. Lo and behold, he was more than I ever asked for. He is more than I ever asked for. So kind, so funny, and very knowledgeable in the Bible. And the cherry on top, he's very handsome. We found out quickly that we like a lot of different things. I mean, not just sort of like. It was the exact same things. One of our commonalities was having Hebrews and Romans be our favorite books of the Bible. And that was just we started making a list. How many did we get on that list, Rob? I don't know. I don't even know where that list is, but we were keeping it because it was so weird. Like, oh, you like this? And what was that saying? Me too. Me too. So that was our phrase. We kind of coined it for ourselves. And that was before the Me Too movement. I want to just let y'all know that, okay? They ruined it. So they didn't get that memo that phrase belonged to us. It's even inscribed in our wedding rings. After 4 months of long-distance dating, we were engaged. God had brought me exactly who I needed. Given that, you would think life for me now would be easier. It didn't get easier. It didn't get easier. Right off the bat, we both had difficulty with our previous spouses while trying to plan our wedding. Our first plan to go to Jamaica was to go to Jamaica, but that had to be canceled. Soon I found myself in a legal battle with my ex to allow Chelsea to come with me to Oregon, and the backup wedding plan to Kauai also had to be canceled. We weren't sure what was going to happen and what Chelsea really wanted. I decided that if she didn't want to move, or if she legally couldn't move, I would actually stay in Texas. I would still marry Rob, that I would remain in Texas until she graduated high school. I knew God brought me Rob. And Chelsea, again, took to him immediately. He was who she needed as a strong Christian father figure. She also needed his patience, tender and emotional side that I did not possess. To help my case to be able to move with Chelsea, it was best for Rob and I to get married prior to the judge deciding. So we settled for a small, intimate wedding with the kids at the Oregon Gardens. It was a beautiful day, and we were able to take our first family photo pictures together. Rob had 2 kids. I didn't mention that, but it's Ashley. And as you know, little Wesley, now very tall. We believed that we'd be able to have a real wedding and honeymoon later that year. Unbeknownst to us, at the time, we would soon be in another legal battle for custody of Rob's children. Needless to say, any money we had to use on a wedding and honeymoon were gone. To this day, we have not had a honeymoon. Life as a blended family has had its good times and bad times. 3 kids learning how to get along with not only each other, but with me and the new house rules. I tried to be nice. I just wanted them to clean, that's all. I just wanted cleaning. Rob would say otherwise, but from my perspective, he seemed to sail through all the changes. And of course, I attribute this to the fact that Chelsea adored him, still does. And I was the one who always looked like the taskmaster. I can't say I wasn't, but that's the role I played. Besides Rob's love for God, one of the many reasons I fell in love with him was his ability to calm me down in situations that I may have been a little amped up. And I felt supported and like I had in the past. Because of his talent, he seemed to embody, he often found himself being a referee between Chelsea and myself, or the one to have those hard conversations with the kids because I just wasn't good at holding in my negative emotions. Rob and I did our best to raise the kids up knowing and loving God. The kids were attending the local Adventist school, and we had family worships and discussions. They weren't always consistently every week, but we did, and made sure to be active in the local church. One Sabbath in the summer of 2014, I was sitting in church and reading the bulletin, and I saw this announcement regarding the Oregon Gladstone Camp Meeting, and noticed the name David Ashrick. He was going to be speaking, and interestingly enough, the reason I even knew of David Ashrick was because I had the opportunity to hear him speak at the Wisconsin camp meeting in 2010. And the only reason I was at the Wisconsin camp meeting was because Chelsea and I had attended it with that man I previously dated. And that camp meeting was our last time together before he broke up with me. I told Rob about David, and even though Rob wasn't that keen on attending the camp meeting, I was able to talk him into hear David, and there was another pastor that came from Texas that I was familiar with and wanted to hear him as well. We went, and after hearing David speak, Rob understood why I was so adamant about hearing him. David spoke about the Bible and God in a way he had never heard before. And Rob has also grown up in the church as a Christian. It was the following summer in 2015 when I again read an announcement in our church bulletin about Lightbearers Convocation down here in Eugene. Lo and behold, David Ashrick was listed as a key speaker. We weren't familiar with Ty Gibson, James Rafferty, or Jeffrey Rosario, but we knew of David, and since the kids were not going to be with us the week of convocation, we decided to check it out. That year, the convocation was focused on the book of Hebrews, one of the two books that Rob and I love. How providential was that? As you may recall, it was one of our favorites. And since at that time, it was kind of a last-minute thing. We both had to work. So that week of convocation, Rob would leave work at 5 o'clock, or I don't know, maybe he left a little early, drive over to where I was, and we would get a burrito, or he'd get a burrito at Taco Bell, and we'd head down here to be at the first meeting of that night. The first night, our minds were completely blown. We had to continue to attend. So we did that every night for, was that 4 days? 4 days, 5 days? Yeah. The entire week was such a blessing. I don't think we could write enough notes. Like I said, both Rob and I, we grew up in the schools, in the churches, and here we were hearing things that were like, what? What? I never thought about that and that from that direction and that relational aspect that God longs for with us. It was a Saturday convocation potluck that we learned that Ty Gibson had a church here in Eugene called Storyline. And a few weeks later, when the kids weren't with us again, we came down to check the Storyline out. And soon, Brian Ferguson, as you all know, made sure that I met him and his family. Now, really, he was just nice enough to invite Rob and I to eat with him at the table with his family. But we quickly formed a friendship. But everyone at Storyline was just so nice and so accepting. It wasn't just Brian. We had been concerned about, during that time, the lack of interest the kids were showing in the church we were going, and just in general to things going on within school and whatnot. They really weren't listening in church, which that's typical, but it was like they're sleeping, and they were old enough not to do that. And they really weren't interested in doing things in their classes at church. And we desperately wanted the kids to know God and his true character like we were finding out. It took us this many years. We want to make sure you get it now. You can have this foundation that we had missed out on. And we were pretty sure that what we were doing at home wasn't really cutting the mustard, when it came to really focusing on or answering questions they may have. And being able to experience how Ty and Jeffrey so effortlessly unpack the Bible, making the story relatable, easy to understand, and focus the relational aspect that God had and wants to have with each of us, we knew this is where God wanted our family. The past 8 years at Storyline have played an integral part in the transformation of how I relate to God. I can even pinpoint the most significant moment in my transformation. And it was during a message that Jeffrey Rosario was giving about the crucifixion. I can't tell you what the title was, but he focused in on the emotions that Jesus was going through. And while on the cross, he cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And it was, then he quoted the author Ellen White in her book, The Desire of Ages. And it says, the Savior could not see through the portals of the tomb. Hope did not present to him his coming forth from the grave, a conqueror, or tell him of the Father's acceptance of the sacrifice. He feared that sin was so offensive to God that their separation was to be eternal. Suddenly, I don't know, I felt like my eyes and my ears had been opened, and I understood and felt the full impact of the sacrifice that Jesus gave to save me, assuring me a place with him in heaven. Christ's sacrifice just went to a completely new level for me. My mind was racing. I was like, wait, what? He didn't know that he wouldn't be with his Father again? Why hadn't I ever clued in on this? Wow. At the moment of that epiphany, I went from a surface level understanding of God's love and being fearful that his judgment to truly accepting the assurance of my salvation through faith in him. You know, the past 10 years in Oregon hasn't always been a bowl of cherries. In fact, as you've heard, my life in general has not been a bowl of cherries. Myself and my family have struggled with inter-family tension and dynamics, multiple job losses, and for odd reasons, financial difficulties, and one daughter basically writing God off. These stresses that I know many of you, if not all, are familiar with. And they take a toll on a marriage. Thank goodness God has given us the strength to persevere as we slowly work through these issues. Today, I can say I'm not perfect, and I still have a lot of growing to do. And because of my human nature, I will continue to sin, whether it be in thought or in deed. But now I have complete assurance of my salvation, knowing he is always there with open arms, ready to comfort and forgive me. Knowing this removes anxiety and guilt. In closing, I really do pray that my story, which was, I know, very long, but I'm 53. What do you expect? I had a lot to say. And it was James' fault, right? We're just going to blame James. I pray that my story, that you did realize a few things. We all, at some time or another, make poor choices. Yet God works with those choices to help bring us back into his plan. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says, he has made everything beautiful in his time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one fathomed what God has done from the beginning to the end. No one's life is perfect, even if you remain faithful to God all your life. The enemy attacks all of us, looking for our weaknesses. He does his best to wear us down and wants us to blame God for our troubles. And even when we do, God is there waiting with open arms. Psalms 46, 10, 11. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. The last thing I would like to share with you is a poem that many of you may know. If you don't, I think you'll see why I love it so much. It's called Footprints in the Sand. It says, one night I dreamed a dream. As I was walking along the beach with my Lord, across the dark sky flashed scenes from my life. From each scene, I noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and one to my Lord. After the last scene of my life flashed before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand. I noticed that at many times along the path of my life, especially at the very lowest and saddest times, there was only one set of footprints. This really troubled me, so I asked the Lord about it. Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you would walk with me all the way. But I noticed that during the saddest and most troubled times of my life, there was only one set of footprints. I don't understand why, when I needed you the most, you would leave me. He whispered, my precious child, I love you and will never leave you. Never, ever, during your trials and testings, when you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you.